I didn't ask for a war. I was perfectly content with mild, sun-dappled mediocrity. But you know how it is in the suburbs. Sometimes a simple $40 bird bath is all it takes for the universe to decide you need to become an accidental supervillain. My name is Alex Peterson, and for 42 years, my greatest ambition was finding my favorite coffee mug before the day got started. I lived a life of controlled leisure. My yard? It was a low-effort monument to greenish. It met the minimum aesthetic requirements of suburban life without betraying any actual passion. I mowed on Wednesdays, I watered on Fridays, and I considered the existence of dandelions a form of wild yellow accents that saved time and money. The single exception, the one piece of external decor I owned, was a simple, concrete bird bath. I called it the original sin in retrospect, but at the time, it was just Barry. Barry was 18 inches high, $40 from the clearance aisle at Home Depot, and his primary function was hosting neighborhood sparrows. Terry the Cardinal was a regular, a big, handsome red guy with a demanding schedule who looked like he ran the local mafia. We had an understanding. I supply the water, he supplies the ambient chirping. Pure, unadulterated tranquility. I loved the sparrows. I loved the lack of effort. I loved my quiet life. It was a good thing. Then, 6 months ago, Karen arrived. I mean, Mrs. Perkins. Formal. Crisp. Terrifying. She lived at 1432 Sycamore, 3 houses down, but her gaze could peel paint off my siding from that distance. She was the kind of person who saw the Homeowners Association guidelines not as suggestions, but as sacred texts requiring militant, joyless enforcement. I was out watering a patch of said wild yellow accents when she materialized. Crisp white linen, sharp iron creases, and a clipboard held like a medieval shield, ready to deliver holy justice. She didn't walk. She glided with the determined efficiency of a high-end robotic vacuum. "Mr. Peterson," she began, her voice perfectly pitched to slice through the ambient sound of a distant leaf blower and my rapidly dwindling sense of personal space. "We need to discuss this fixture." I blinked. The bird bath? Is Terry the Cardinal complaining about the water temperature again? He's very particular about the chill factor this time of year. I was thinking of adding a tiny electric heater. Her nostrils flared. It was an impressive feat of facial physics, suggesting deep internal suffering caused by my $40 fountain. "This is not a jest. I have reviewed the HOA guidelines, Section 3, Subsection B, Article 4, Hose Paragraph 2, which covers unsightly, unpermitted, and unsanitary water features. This thing is a trifecta of violations." "Unsanitary?" I shot back, leaning on my hose, already feeling the hot, familiar surge of annoyance. "Lady, I clean it weekly. I scrub it with a special brush. It's cleaner than the handle of that clipboard, which looks suspiciously like it's been handled by 1,000 unjustifiably served diners." "It encourages rodents," she hissed, pointing a manicured nail at the empty concrete bowl. "It's a standing water source that invites mosquitoes. And the cheap concrete finish, it's chipping. It lowers property values. Frankly," she paused for dramatic effect, leaning in slightly, "it looks like a cheap, abandoned baptismal font." That phrase. Cheap, abandoned baptismal font. It wasn't just a complaint. It was an insult to Barry, to the sparrows, and to my fundamental right to be mildly tacky in my own yard. This was the crucial pivot, the genesis of the Great Water Feature War. I could have apologized. I could have bought a new, marginally less chipped one. I could have simply moved it to the backyard and enjoyed clandestine bird watching, but the sheer, exquisite pettiness of her complaint demanded a response of equal, but opposite force. My face went deadpan. My inner monologue, however, was drafting blueprints for aquatic destruction. You want sanctity, Mrs. Perkins? You want architectural vision? You shall have it, and it will be loud. You know what, Mrs. Perkins? You're absolutely right, I said, delivering the first lie of a beautiful, new, antagonistic relationship. My eyes met hers, and I felt the faint spark of the madness I was about to unleash. It is cheap, it is unsightly, and it certainly doesn't reflect the architectural vision of this particular suburban hellscape. My apologies. She actually preened slightly, mistaking my sarcasm for defeat. A look of smug satisfaction, a look I would spend the next 3 months working tirelessly and expensively to wipe off her face, settled in her eyes. I'm glad we could resolve this amicably, Mr. Peterson. I expect it removed by the end of the week. Oh, it'll be removed, I assured her. I went inside and stared at the handwritten note she'd left, a masterpiece of passive-aggressive block lettering demanding immediate action. That bird bath, Barry, had to go. But he needed a replacement, a glorious, magnificent, utterly unnecessary replacement, something that didn't just hold water, something that celebrated water, something that perhaps required its own dedicated security detail and a staff horticulturist. I spent the rest of the day researching commercial-grade pond liners, the legal definition of fountain versus architectural water feature, and, critically, the difference between fog and steam for permitting purposes. My first act of defiance? I immediately upgraded Barry with a tiny, ridiculous solar-powered LED bubbler that changed colors every 3 seconds. It looked like a disco ball for ants. I knew it wouldn't last, but it was a great appetizer for the main course. The war had begun, and the first casualty was my sanity, and maybe her blood pressure. I spent 3 days on the design, or what I affectionately called Project Neptune's Spite. My initial sketch looked like a cross between the Bellagio fountains, a wedding cake for Godzilla, and an actual lighthouse. It was ridiculous. I needed height, volume, and presence. This couldn't be some flimsy fiberglass thing you bought next to the garden gnomes. This had to be permanent. It had to be monumental. It had to be visible from space, or at least visible over Mrs. Perkins's prize-winning, unnervingly uniform boxwood hedge. I realized quickly that this was going to require more than a hose and a prayer. I needed construction. I needed concrete. I needed a lawyer. And worst of all, I might need a city permit. The city permit search was, predictably, a disaster in bureaucratic form. I called the city planning office, navigated 5 minutes of elevator music designed to induce premature aging, and finally reached a woman named Brenda. Her voice sounded like she chewed on dried legal documents for breakfast. City planning. You've reached Brenda. How can I not help you today? Hi, Brenda. I'm Alex Peterson, and I'm looking to install a fountain. What are the rules? A decorative fountain, sir. If it's under 4 feet and holds less than 50 gallons, it's exempt from all but a cursory aesthetic review. You submit Form 32B. Right. And what if it's taller than 4 feet and possibly holds more than 50 gallons? Say, a lot more. Maybe enough to necessitate its own ecosystem. Then you need a Class B water feature permit, a geotechnical survey, and an inspection from Public Works. That's Form 47A, 47B, and the mandatory 58C safety assessment. She rattled this off with the tired fluency of a bank teller discussing overdraft fees. Got it. And if I plan on adding industrial-grade ultrasonic fog machines? There was a slight pause. It was the longest silence I'd heard on the line since the elevator music. Sir, that would fall under atmospheric enhancements, and would require not only a full site survey, but also an EPA noise and air quality exemption, Form 72A Theta. I deadpanned. So no simple fog machine permit? She hung up. I decided that, much like my sanity, the permits could wait until after the concrete was dry. This was a reactionary build, not a permitted one. The construction came first, the paperwork later. Maybe. Next came the contractor. I found Leo, a grizzled landscaper whose face looked like a topographic map of every bad decision he'd ever made. He had a neck like a tree trunk and a permanent expression of existential dread. He arrived in a truck that looked like it had survived the apocalypse and was currently debating whether to finish the job. He was smoking a cigarette down to the filter. "Peterson, right? Says here you want a 3-tier fountain," Leo grunted, leaning against his rusty tailgate. "That's the basic model, Leo, but it needs to be structurally sound. We're talking reinforced concrete footing. Think bunker stability. I need it. To handle a minimum of 600 gallons, maybe 7, depending on the displacement of the statuary, and resist a Category 3 hurricane. Because, let's be honest, Mrs. Perkins is Category 5. Leo took a long, skeptical drag. His eyebrows disappeared into his hairline. 600 gallons. You got a lake around here I missed? This ain't an Olympic swimming pool, pal. It's a front yard. My neighbor complained about my bird bath, Leo, I explained, as if this simple fact clarified everything. He just looked at me, waiting for the punchline, the wink, the confession that this was all a prank show. When none came, he sighed, the sound like dry leaves scattering. "Look, I install ponds for rich people and retaining walls for everyone else. I've done a fountain shaped like a dolphin that vomited water into a wading pool. I thought I'd seen it all. What's the catch here? Because this isn't making sense, even by rich people standards. The catch is the extras. See this blueprint?" I unfurled my hand-drawn masterpiece, which was annotated in a mix of technical jargon and spiteful declarations. "That little red square on the bottom tier? That's for a commercial-grade ultrasonic fogger. It needs its own dedicated waterproof conduit run from the main power panel. I need to be able to cloak the entire property in dense, low-lying mist on demand. It needs to be safe for neighborhood dogs, but terrifying for HOA presidents." Leo's eyes narrowed, finally showing a flicker of interest, the interest of a man who recognizes true, unadulterated madness. "You want to run a fog machine? For a fountain? You trying to grow mushrooms or host a rave?" "I'm trying to achieve maximum ambiance, Leo. Maximum glorious, spiteful ambiance. And notice the third tier? I need at least 20 independent submersible LED spotlights, individually addressable and capable of syncing to a playlist. I want a light show powerful enough to signal Mars, or at least annoy Mrs. Perkins when she's trying to watch her evening news." "A playlist," he repeated, flicking the cigarette butt into a gravel patch. He pulled out a worn notebook and scribbled something incomprehensible, probably his retirement date. "Look, man, I don't care if you want to install a solid gold toilet on your front lawn and call it the Loo of Liberty, but this is going to be expensive. It's going to be messy, and every nosy neighbor on the block, especially the linen-wearing one, is going to call the city, the cops, and maybe the National Guard. Why are you doing this, really?" "Because," I explained, leaning in conspiratorially, lowering my voice to the perfect pitch of wounded suburban pride, "I refuse to be bullied by the tyranny of a $20 piece of concrete. It's not about the fountain, Leo. It's about freedom. It's about sending a message. Also, I'll pay you double your standard rate, cash, if you can get it done in 3 weeks, before the next HOA meeting." "Freedom, huh?" A slow, grudging grin spread across his face, a magnificent piece of carpentry that rarely saw the light of day. He shook my hand, his grip like a vice. "All right, I'm in. But when the concrete truck blocks the road, you talk to the cops, not me. I'm just building the bunker." And thus, the chaos began. The next morning, Leo brought a crew that looked less like a construction team and more like a biker gang doing community service. They were professional, efficient, and wonderfully loud. The noise alone was a beautiful symphony of rebellion. We had an actual crane to hoist the massive base bowl. It looked like a misplaced planetary ring being lowered onto my tiny suburban plot. Concrete trucks the size of small whales rumbled down my street. The street was carnage, perfectly organized carnage. Mrs. Perkins was, naturally, the first to react. I caught her reflection in my living room window. She was standing perfectly still in her bay window, a horrified silhouette against the gentle illumination of her tastefully lit interior. Her face, I imagined, was doing that impressive nostril flare again, only this time it was coupled with a silent scream. The neighborhood gossip ignited instantly, spreading faster than a cheap rumor at a high school cafeteria. "What is he building? A water treatment plant? I heard it's a monument to his dead cat, a very large cat. No, it's a filtration system for the local sewer main. He's a hero, or crazy." The confusion of the crew was also a sight to behold. I overheard one of the guys, a massive man named Rico, talking to his partner. "Yo, why we gotta run 4 separate PVC lines for this? Boss says it's for the special effects. Dude wants it to look like a haunted rave. On a Tuesday? Boss says the HOA lady doesn't like his bird bath." Rico paused, scratching his helmet. "Okay, I get it now. Double the lines, triple the pumps. This is art. Pure revenge art." The very next day, Karen tried her first escalation. She waited until Leo and Rico were pouring the foundation slab, a process that required absolute focus and minimal interruptions. She marched up to the orange construction fencing, her voice strained against the roar of the concrete vibrator. "Excuse me, is this equipment permitted? This noise is unacceptable. You started before 8 a.m. Leo, wearing earplugs and a hard hat, cupped his hands around his mouth. "Ma'am, it's called progress. We're building a water feature. We have a tight deadline." "It's blocking access to the sidewalk. You are violating pedestrian right-of-way," she screamed, gesturing wildly at a retired couple who had to detour around the work zone. Leo looked directly at Charlotte, turning off the vibrator for a dramatic moment of silence. "Ma'am, it's called a temporary disturbance. We're putting in the fog conduits now. We have to be precise. If we don't install these perfectly, the fog will be uneven and ruin the optimal atmospheric effect." He just completely bypassed her valid complaint about noise and access and went straight to the fog conduits, treating the optimal atmospheric effect like it was a protected structural requirement, like load-bearing beams. Karen stared at him, bewildered by the sheer audacity of his response. She was expecting a flustered contractor. She got a man fully dedicated to my ridiculous vision. Leo winked at me, gave a thumbs up to Rico, and cranked the vibrator back on. The roar was deafening. Karen retreated, defeated for the moment, but her retreat was the calculated, measured withdrawal of a tactical genius who was already drafting her second letter, probably laminated this time, and including detailed satellite imagery. I knew the cops were coming next. I had to stifle a laugh with my hand. I walked inside and looked at the partially poured concrete. It was ugly, raw, and full of promise. The Battle of the Bird Bath had escalated into the War of the Water feature, and I had the high ground. It happened at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday. We were pouring the second tier, which, according to Leo, required a specialized vibrating trowel that sounded exactly like a jet engine trying to give birth to a jackhammer in my driveway. The sheer volume was magnificent, but clearly illegal. Predictably, the flashing blue and red lights arrived before the smell of coffee had properly dissipated. Officer Reynolds was about my age, tired, and sporting the 1,000-yard stare of a man who dealt with too many unleashed dogs and misplaced recycling bins. He clearly regretted every single life decision that led him to mediate a suburban water feature dispute. "Mr. Peterson, we have multiple complaints about noise, illegal construction, and what one caller referred to as a geological event and possibly the sound of Satan's trumpet," Officer Reynolds stated, rubbing his temples with 2 fingers. Karen was, of course, watching the whole thing from her bay window, sipping tea like she was watching an opera about the inevitable downfall of her enemies. "Officer, I am well within my rights to engage in home improvement. This is my property," I countered, trying to sound as reasonable as possible while standing next to a 6-foot-tall pile of scaffolding. I produced a laminated copy of a random city zoning ordinance I printed off Wikipedia that technically allowed for temporary erection of construction scaffolding. "This is not home improvement, sir. This is a monument. It looks like you're building a defensive fort against squirrels. Where is your Class B water feature permit and your EPA noise exemption for the jet engine?" "Ah, excellent question, officer. A few things to unpack there. First, I've decided to classify this not as a fountain, which is a utility, but as a private, non-denominational, suanon outdoor sculptural hydrological art installation. I'm filing the appropriate paperwork with the Cultural Arts Commission this afternoon. I'm waiting for a quote on the bronze plaque, which will detail the triumph of the human spirit over unnecessary bureaucracy." Officer Reynolds sighed, pulling out his notebook and chewing on the end of his pen. "You're calling this art in your front yard?" "Yes. It's a study in fluid dynamics and the triumph of the human spirit over petty bureaucratic interference. It's a statement. Plus, it's going to have a light show. Is there a noise ordinance violation right now? The machinery is currently silent." Leo, God bless the man, took my cue. He had miraculously stopped the loud machinery. "We're done with the loud stuff for the next 6 hours, officer. Just waiting for the concrete to set. Construction is paused. Can't rush art, you know, especially hydrological art. It's delicate." Officer Reynolds looked at the massive, raw concrete structure, then at Karen's twitching curtain, then back at me. He looked like he wanted to quit his job and become a lighthouse keeper, specifically one who hated water features and felt morally compromised. "Mr. Peterson," he said, handing me a warning citation for noise violation before 7:45 a.m. It was printed on a form that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1982. "Next time, you start at 8 a.m. sharp, and you will get that permit. I don't care if you call it a hydrological deity. If I have to come back here and this sculptural art installation is causing problems again, I will shut down the whole site, seize the equipment, and cite you for contempt of suburban peace. Understood?" "Understood, officer. Loudly. And thank you for your commitment to the arts. Drive safely." He didn't respond, just climbed back into his cruiser and drove off, probably to spend the rest of his shift dealing with actual crime, feeling vaguely embarrassed by the morning's activities. The police visit was a wake-up call. I needed a better defense than a wiki-printed zoning ordinance. I needed a professional. I needed Mark. Mark, my friend, was a corporate lawyer who handles mergers and acquisitions, meaning he specializes in making things look perfectly legal, even when they are profoundly questionable. So, you're trying to circumvent city planning regulations, the EPA and the HOA, because your neighbor called your birdbath a cheap, abandoned baptismal font, and you've now escalated to a situation requiring police intervention? Mark asked. I could hear him stifling laughter over the phone, probably in his soundproof office high above the city, wearing an incredibly expensive suit. That is a crude yet accurate summary of the current situation. I need a temporary classification that allows for large water features and excessive atmospheric enhancement. Mark was silent for a moment, clearly running his powerful, expensive brain through the municipal code like a supercomputer searching for loopholes. Okay, forget fountain. That's a utility. It has to be temporary. We can use the seasonal enhancement loophole, which every suburbanite uses to justify leaving their Christmas lights up until March. We market it as a holiday water feature, or a celebration of the autumnal mist and the flow of commerce. It's art, but it's transient art. Transient, huh? I'm not dismantling 600 gallons of concrete and marble, Mark. Leo built this thing to withstand a siege. It weighs about 3 tons. You don't have to dismantle it. You just have to say you will. Just long enough to get the final inspection. Tell them the fog machines are atmospheric snow in December, the colored lights are festive illumination, and the entire thing is just a very elaborate, slightly early Christmas decoration. It's the suburbs, Alex. They love that crap. They'll argue with you about the height, but they'll never argue with holiday spirit. It's a legal force field designed to confuse bureaucrats. Mark, you are a genius. I owe you a very large and expensive bottle of scotch. Maybe a whole case. You owe me more than that, buddy. I just filed a document with the city classifying your water feature as a Class C theatrical prop for a non-profit, community-oriented, temporary outdoor production. If anyone asks, you're currently rehearsing for a neighborhood production of The Little Mermaid. With Leo handling the concrete and the siege stability, I needed someone to handle the theatrics, the electricity, the lighting, the foggers. I hired Sparky. Sparky wore a shirt that read, "I'm positive I'm negative," and had more tools clipped to his belt than a Swiss Army knife display. He looked at my wiring diagrams with deep suspicion and a slight drool. "So," Sparky started, looking at the 2 massive conduits coming out of the fountain base. "You got your submersible pumps for the tiers, your feeder line from the main, and 4 separate lines dedicated to foggers? And they're all individually grounded?" "Yep. Redundancy is for amateurs, Sparky. I need coverage. I need to be able to blanket the entire front yard in a high-density, low-lying mist on command, and I need multiple angles to control the flow and dispersion. I also need to be able to change the color of the fog from below with the lights, which, by the way, need a separate, programmable DMX controller." He scratched his beard, his face a mask of awe and confusion. "You realize this is enough electrical power to run a small commercial kitchen? And you're running it to make fog. Kitchens are boring, Sparky. Spite is eternal. And the goal is ambiance, specifically the ambiance of an ancient swamp in a neon city. So, you want a suburban water feature that looks like a haunted graveyard, but with Italianate marble and a techno beat," he summarized, finally cracking a smile. "Exactly, Sparky. Hilariously expensive, rave-in-a-swamp ambiance. Can you do it safely and quickly?" He grinned, tucking a wire, stripper back into his vest. "I can run power anywhere, man. This is my kind of crazy. Let's make some fog." Over the next week, the fountain took shape. It was undeniable now, a massive, tiered concrete wedding cake dominating my otherwise bland lawn. It was imposing, ridiculous, and perfect. Karen, meanwhile, was not idle. She sent the official HOA cease and desist, laminated and delivered by a nervous teenager on a bicycle who mumbled apologies as he handed it over. I read the entire 4-page document, which cited everything from unauthorized material usage to excessive glare potential to unsanctioned geological alteration. I then taped it to the side of the concrete mixer and used it as a handy place to hang my safety glasses. It served as a wonderful, laminated reminder of the motivation behind the project. The art installation was nearing completion, and my resolve was harder than Leo's bunker-grade concrete. The foggers were set to be tested next. The day Sparky finished wiring the fog conduits and hooked up the commercial-grade ultrasonic machines was a milestone. These weren't cheap Halloween foggers. These were silent, industrial units designed to generate low-lying, dense mist for stage effects. I only needed about 20% power for a pleasant, ethereal effect. Naturally, I demanded 100%. "Ready, Sparky?" I asked, holding the remote like a detonator, feeling like a Bond villain about to unveil his latest global domination scheme. I felt a surge of pride and impending doom. Sparky adjusted his protective goggles. "I mean, technically, yes. All systems are green, but Alex, you're going to cover the whole street. That air intake is going to pull in every dandelion seed within a 3-mile radius. And if the wind shifts, Mrs. Perkins's entire house is going to look like the set of The Shining when the snow hits. Full power. 3, 2, 1. I pressed the button. It wasn't loud. It was silent, smooth, and utterly overwhelming. A silent, billowing cloud of mist erupted from the base of the fountain, pouring over the tiers and rolling out across my lawn like a magnificent white water flood. It was glorious. Within 30 seconds, my entire front lawn, the sidewalk, Karen's mailbox, and half of my neighbor Mr. Henderson's prize-winning petunias were completely engulfed. It was a dense, cool, white fog. It looked less like ambiance and more like a swamp monster was throwing a baby shower in a very expensive mausoleum. Visibility dropped to near zero. Then, the inevitable happened. A car horn blared frantically. A sedan stopped dead in the middle of the street, the driver's face peering frantically out the window, looking genuinely panicked, unsure if they had entered the Earth's atmosphere. "Sparky, we're fogging the traffic. We've achieved total street occlusion. It looks like a cloud decided to take a nap on my lawn." "Told you, man. It's too much. You've essentially created a localized weather event. This thing has more output than a pop concert." I hit the off switch, and the mist slowly, dramatically began to dissipate, retreating back toward the fountain base. Sparky, now covered in a fine layer of manufactured dew, looked at me with a mixture of respect and deep concern. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Perkins, just called the non-emergency line again," he reported, checking his phone. "She didn't use the word fog. She said you were engaging in chemical warfare and deploying unsanctioned atmospheric depressants designed to lower the morale of the local populace." "Atmospheric depressants?" I mused. "That's a good one. She's getting better at the jargon. Maybe I should send her a thesaurus." The fountain needed music, obviously. The fog was the atmosphere. The music was the narrative. It couldn't just be a babbling brook. It had to be an experience. I hired a sound guy, DJ Tidal Wave. His real name was Trevor, a 20-year-old with impressive turntables, a deeply philosophical understanding of bass drops, and absolutely no social awareness. He came over and looked at the directional speakers I needed installed, the kind that shoot sound in a narrow beam, ensuring I annoy the absolute minimum number of people while still giving the fountain its voice. "Trevor, I need directional sound, only focusing on the fountain and maybe a 10-foot radius. I don't want to wake up the whole neighborhood, just confuse the squirrels. What can you do?" "Yeah, man, no problem," Trevor said, adjusting his backwards baseball cap. "I got these sick parabolic speakers, pinpoint audio. We can make the soundscape incredibly localized. So, what's the vibe? Chill hop? Lo-fi beats? Maybe some meditative rainforest sounds to counteract the aggressive concrete aesthetic?" "Trevor, I need contrast. I need a playlist that runs the gamut of human emotion, or at least the gamut of my frustration. This is a psychological fountain. I've compiled a list. Monday nights, Vivaldi's Four Seasons, but only the super dramatic parts where the music sounds like a storm is brewing. We call that Inclement Mondays. Tuesday, the main theme from Jaws on a 15-minute loop, accompanied by a pulsing, deep red light from Sparky's setup. That's Shark Week every week. Wednesday, Enya's greatest hits." Trevor paused, his fingers hovering over his mixer. "Enya? Why Enya? That's not very spiteful. That's just kind of sad." "Enya is the key, Trevor," I explained patiently. "When the fog is at 50% density, it looks mystical. And Enya makes it sound like an elven funeral is about to happen in the mist. It's confusing. It's beautiful. It's completely unsettling. It's perfect psychological warfare. It makes you question reality." "Dude," he breathed, finally understanding the depth of my pettiness. "That's some next-level psychological warfare aesthetic. I can program that DMX controller for you. We can make the lights flash to the Jaws theme heartbeat. And for Friday, nights when the traffic is heavy, I can program a custom sound effect. The slow, agonizing groan of a concrete bird bath being crushed by the weight of expectations." "Trevor, you are an artist," I confirmed, shaking his hand firmly. "The budget is unlimited. The goal is maximum confusion and minimum legal exposure. Make sure you layer the whale songs under the Enya." The neighborhood was now officially split down the middle. My actions had created a political divide that made national politics look civil. I was the anti-hero. Old Mr. Henderson, who lived across the street and was an 80-year-old former Marine with a deep, abiding hatred for the HOA, loved me. He'd sit on his porch and salute the fountain whenever the Valkyries theme played. "That's one hell of a way to stick it to that witch, Alex," he yelled over my hedge one morning. I was adjusting the pH level of the 600 gallons of treated water. "Makes my lawn look pathetic, but I love the show. Keep the fog coming. You know, I put a single brick on my porch 20 years ago, and she wrote me a 3-page letter about unauthorized masonry accents. Now look at this. She must be eating her clipboard." "She's been stress laminating her legal documents, Mr. Henderson. I can hear the machine running at night. It's a horrible sound." But Brenda from 2 doors down, a woman who considered beige a radical color and dressed exclusively in varying shades of oat, was firmly in Karen's corner. "It's tacky. It's an eyesore. It's wet. The condensation is damaging my stucco. My Shih Tzu, Prince Fluffington, is developing anxiety from the high-frequency sound waves. It's an acoustic assault," she shrieked at me while walking her miniature poodle, who, incidentally, seemed perfectly fine. "I apologize for the moisture, Brenda," I replied politely, grabbing a bottle of Pool Shock. "I'll look into installing a dehumidifier for Princess Fluffington. Say, are you enjoying the Tribute to the Humpback Whale Migration playlist this afternoon? The tenor is particularly deep today." I had Trevor playing whale songs accompanied by a deep, resonant, sub-bass pulse. She clutched her dog to her chest and scurried away, presumably to call Karen. The supporters loved me. The opponents hated me with the fiery passion of 1,000 unjustly cancelled appointments. It was exhilarating. With the sound and light systems operational, I needed to address the final layer of aesthetics. The statues. Cherubs were too innocent. Greek gods were too pretentious. I needed something uniquely, beautifully absurd. I had the concrete company cast 2 small, absurdly detailed concrete squirrels. They weren't just standing there, they were locked in a vicious, eternal wrestling match on the second tier, their eyes staring into the middle distance, forever struggling over an imaginary acorn. It was a perfect metaphor for the neighborhood. I positioned them right in front of Karen's line of sight, so they were the first thing she saw when she looked out her window. Leo installed them and stood back, nodding slowly. The squirrels. Nice touch. That's how you know it's not too classy. It gives it a certain desperation, a certain low-brow appeal. It's allegorical, Leo. It represents the perpetual, fruitless conflict of suburban existence, particularly when dealing with small territorial disputes. Sure, man. Looks like 2 rodents fighting over a nut to me. Is that why you insisted on the separate wrestling spotlight? Of course. Detail is everything. You need to highlight the struggle. The fountain was magnificent. 3 tiers of polished, light gray concrete. Bubbling water. Directional sound. Enough wiring to power a small city. And 2 combatant squirrels. All that was left was the final performance, the grand opening. I felt the adrenaline pumping. Karen was about to get a show she hadn't paid for, and I was ready to claim my victory. I called it the inaugural flowing of the aqueous monument to personal liberty. The grand opening was scheduled for 7:00 p.m. on a Friday. I barbecued hot dogs and supplied cheap beer. My way of saying thank you to the supportive neighbors and you're welcome to the haters. About 20 neighbors showed up. Half were cheering for me, half were waiting for the fountain to spontaneously combust and electrocute me. I was fine with either outcome. As dusk settled, Trevor had the sound system primed, and the air was thick with anticipation, and the smell of cheap propane. I grabbed the microphone Trevor brought, which was slightly sticky from a spilled beer, and tapped it. "Friends, neighbors, and bitter enemies," I announced, my voice echoing slightly off the surrounding houses. For too long, the humble bird bath has been a symbol of compromise, a compromise I was perfectly happy with, I might add. But tonight we celebrate the absolute lack of compromise. We celebrate the power of water, light, and pure, unadulterated spite. The crowd cheered, led by Mr. Henderson, who was wearing a t-shirt that read, "Keep Suburban Weird, Eston 2024. I raised my hand for silence. 3, 2, 1, let the pettiness flow. I hit the switch. The 3-tier fountain roared to life. Not just a gentle trickle, but a roar. The water jets shot up with the power of a fire hose, cascading down into the massive lower bowls with the sound of a minor waterfall. The lights, 20 of them, all independently controlled, snapped on, cycling through a mesmerizing display of electric blue, neon green, and a jarring, pulsing magenta. Trevor hit the cue, and Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries, all brass and booming intensity, blasted out of the directional speakers. Then, the fog machines kicked in. At 75% power, they didn't completely blind the street, but they enveloped the fountain itself in a dense, ground-hugging cloud that shimmered with the color of the lights. The concrete monument looked less like a fountain and so more like a mysterious, aggressively lit alien artifact that had landed in my yard and was about to demand tribute. The crowd went wild. Then Karen arrived. She wasn't carrying a clipboard, nor a laminated letter. She was carrying a leather briefcase, and she looked like a prosecuting attorney attending a deposition against Satan himself. Her face was pale, rigid with fury and indignation, but her stride was determined. She marched directly up to me, pulling a thick, spiral-bound document out of the case. It was sealed with a massive, waxy red seal that looked suspiciously like the one on the back of her Christmas card envelopes. "This," she said, her voice shaking with controlled rage, managing to sound loud despite the Wagner, "is a formal complaint, notarized, spiral-bound, and filed this afternoon with the HOA, the City Council, the EPA, and the Neighborhood Watch. You have violated, and I quote, the Quiet Enjoyment of Property Ordinance, the Excessive Lumen Output Bylaw, and most specifically, the Decorative Pond and Water Feature Statute 5A, which states no such feature shall exceed 6 feet in height or 40 decibels of sustained sound." She slammed the binder onto my hot dog table, causing a mustard bottle to wobble dangerously and momentarily halting the flow of suburban celebration. I picked up the ridiculous binder. It smelled faintly of lavender and obsession. I weighed it in my hand. It was easily 2 pounds of pure, distilled rage. "Mrs. Perkins, I appreciate your thoroughness. I really do. You've done remarkable research. The cross-referencing on the lumen output is particularly impressive. But you've wasted good ink. I have done no such thing. This monstrosity must be removed. It's a health and safety hazard. The air quality is compromised. Your excessive moisture is encouraging mold in my boxwoods, and the lights are violating the city's dark sky initiative, which is a key component of my spiritual well-being." Moldy boxwoods, really? Is that a Title V violation? I'm pretty sure that's a gardening issue, not a civil one, I asked, completely deadpan. "It is a violation of decency." Decency aside, let's talk statutes, because I came prepared for this chapter of our dramatic saga. Health and safety? I have 2 licensed, bonded, and now slightly damp contractors here, and my corporate lawyer on speed dial. I put my phone on speaker and held it up to the crowd and Karen. This was the moment of truth. Mark's voice, sounding slightly distorted but authoritative, came through the speaker. "Good evening, Mrs. Perkins. Mark from Smith & Jones. I have reviewed your complaint. My client, Mr. Alex Peterson, is currently operating a non-permanent Class C theatrical prop, classified as a seasonal hydrological art installation, celebrating the late harvest and the concept of flow, according to the Seasonal Enhancement Statute, Title VII, which allows for temporary, non-permanent displays up to 9 feet for holiday purposes. Our decibel output and volumetric flow rate are within the tolerance levels for a theatrical prop during a permitted rehearsal window." Karen blinked, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a bewildered carp. "A theatrical prop? It's a 6-foot concrete fountain. It's permanent. You can't just call it temporary." "Ah, but it's only 6 feet high, Mrs. Perkins, if you don't count the wrestling squirrels, which are decorative accents, and the fog, which is a controlled, non-toxic atmospheric effect. Furthermore, per our filing, my client is happy to remove the entire display on January 1st, as is customary for all seasonal enhancements, such as nativity scenes or giant inflatable reindeer." She had no counter. The HOA rules didn't cover theatrical props, hydrological art installations, or atmospheric effects. The sheer absurdity of the legal defense froze her in her tracks. She was a master of the mundane. I had deployed the master of the bizarre. She sputtered, grasping for a comeback, but found only air. "This is not over, Mr. Peterson. I'll take this to the Supreme Court of Property Values. You will hear from my attorney," she vowed, spinning on her heel and marching back to her house, her briefcase clutched like a weapon, and her white linen slightly dampened by the atmospheric effect. I looked at the crowd, who were now cheering for me. I raised my beer. "To liberty, to art, and to the autumnal mist!" The crowd roared its approval. I had won the battle, if not the eternal war of wills. January 1st came and went, and the only thing I removed was a slightly tacky, water-resistant Christmas wreath I'd placed on the middle tier. The fountain, my seasonal hydrological art installation, stayed put. I even gave it a new, equally pretentious title for the winter: The Study of Frozen Volumetric Flow, which involved setting the lights to an icy blue and playing a lot of glacial wind sound effects. Karen's promised Supreme Court of Property Values lawsuit fizzled out into a series of incredibly aggressive emails to the HOA board, which they mostly ignored. Apparently, tackiness isn't a federal crime, and my seasonal enhancement defense was just legitimate enough to give the city code enforcement headaches. They eventually sent me a sternly worded letter about the excessive volume of Enya, suggesting it might violate a previously unwritten public serenity statute. I turned the volume down slightly and switched the Enya playlist to smooth jazz, a much more passive-aggressive approach. The fountain, now simply the fountain, became a permanent fixture, an architectural anomaly that defined the 1400 block of Sycamore Street. The neighborhood adapted. The local kids used the fog for elaborate ground-level hide-and-seek games. Delivery drivers used the high-powered lights, which, when set to a steady white, could be seen for miles, to spot my house from a mile away. I had achieved peak suburban absurdity and, more importantly, peak spite. My routine changed entirely. Instead of watering the dandelions, I was now maintaining 600 gallons of treated water, troubleshooting submersible pump issues, cleaning the wrestling squirrels with a toothbrush, and programming complex light shows. I had traded a 5-minute chore for a full-time, expensive, and completely unnecessary hobby. It cost me 5 figures, led to a restraining order threat, quickly dismissed, and 2 sleepless weeks of legal scrambling. But it was mine. Karen didn't give up, of course. She just changed tactics. She stopped calling the city and started calling the media. We had a local news helicopter fly over once, referring to the fountain as the Rave on Redwood. I loved it. I made sure to play the Jaws theme extra loud that day. The city, realizing the PR nightmare of trying to legally dismantle a theatrical prop dedicated to the flow of commerce, eventually shrugged and stopped pursuing it. I kept the seasonal enhancement loophole alive by switching the theme every 6 weeks. The Fountain of Valentine's Vengeance. All pink fog and aggressive love songs. The aquatic display of unnecessary patriotism for the 4th of July. Red, white, and blue lights, military marches, and the occasional fireworks sound effect. The greatest victory was routine. Every morning, I'd step outside to inspect my domain, and there would be Karen standing at her window waiting for me. I'd activate the fog, just a gentle 10% mist, enough to make her view slightly hazy, making her world just a little bit softer and more irritatingly ethereal. I knew she was drafting something new, a letter, a petition, a strongly worded haiku. But she couldn't win the legal fight because I hadn't broken the spirit of the law, only the spirit of suburban peace. Leo came by 6 months later, ostensibly to check the concrete for microfractures. There were none. He built it to last 1,000 years. He looked at the fountain, which was currently cycling through a deep purple theme set to some surprisingly intense classical cello music. "So," Leo asked, leaning against the wrestling squirrels, who looked surprisingly comfortable in the damp environment. "Any regrets, Alex? That maintenance schedule looks brutal." "Only one, that I didn't put in a 4th tier and a remote-controlled confetti cannon. Imagine the New Year's Eve display. It would have been worth the fine." "You are insane, man," he said, shaking his head. "I almost quit on the day you asked about the Jaws theme. I thought you were going to try to attract actual sharks." "I know, but I won. The bird bath is gone, and in its place stands a testament to the sheer, magnificent pettiness of man. You want to know the best part? Karen still calls the non-emergency line every time I play the Jaws theme. They hang up on her now. I heard the dispatcher say, 'Oh, it's the water feature guy again. Just tell her it's an interpretive dance piece.'" I looked at the fountain. It was a monster, a 6-foot, 3-tiered, fog-spewing, light-blasting, music-playing tribute to a small act of perceived injustice. It had cost me a small fortune, but in exchange, I had gained a purpose. I had become the neighborhood spectacle, the man who cared so little about conformity that he would commit architectural suicide just to make a point. What was the point? I wondered sometimes, adjusting the timer on the directional speakers. Was it really about freedom? Or was it just about proving that I, Alex Peterson, mild-mannered man of mediocrity, could be just as obsessive, just as controlling, and just as utterly unreasonable as Mrs. Perkins? Probably the latter. The fountain wasn't a symbol of liberty. It was a symbol of perfectly executed spite. It was a beautiful, moist monument to the fact that you should never, ever mess with a man's bird bath. The cost was high, but the satisfaction was priceless. I found a strange kind of peace in the complexity. My drama was no longer deciding between Thai or pizza. It was balancing the chemical compounds in a 600-gallon reservoir and adjusting the wind sensors on the foggers. It was a better, more absurd drama. The fountain was a conversation starter. It was a landmark. It was mine. And it stood exactly where that cheap, abandoned baptismal font used to sit. The petty satisfaction was a renewable resource, powered by the constant, dull roar of the submerged pump. One afternoon, a bewildered Amazon driver pulled up to deliver a small package of fog machine fluid. Ironically enough, a subscription I'd set up. He squinted through a cloud of artificial mist that smelled faintly of cinnamon, my current autumnal mist variant. "Excuse me, sir," the young guy said, holding the package like a sacred relic. I've been driving this route for 5 years. I've never seen this before. Am I supposed to be here? Is this a theme park opening? Did I take a wrong turn into a rich person's fever dream?" "Nope, just a residential address. That's my fountain," I said, leaning on the concrete rim. I was wearing a slightly ridiculous, custom-made polo shirt embroidered with the image of the wrestling squirrels. "It's massive and foggy, and is that operatic soprano music coming from the geraniums? Is this normal?" "It's an aggressive tenor, actually, and it's perfectly normal around here. It started as a bird bath," I explained, giving him the short version. He just shook his head, handed me the package, and whispered, "Man, I hope you win." "I already have, kid," I said, hitting the button on my pocket remote that switched the lights from aggressive tenor crimson to subtle moonlight white. "I already have. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check the structural integrity of my seasonal enhancement before the next HOA meeting." The final lesson? Never underestimate the power of a man who has been told his bird bath is unsightly. The fountain was my monument, and I was its proud, slightly moist, eternally amused curator.